the creative director took me out for a coffee and she sat me down and said, "You can't charge this much." She actually said those words. Hey friend, I'm so glad you're here. My name is Rachel Koronek and I'm an accountant turned teacher turned food photographer who's celebrating 10 years in business as a photographer. And I wanted to share with you some setbacks and failures that I've experienced over the last 10 years. So I first discovered food photography in 2012 and I picked up a camera and took my very first food photo. From then on, I toyed with the idea of getting paid to take photos. And I worked over 10 years between two countries, learned all the skills that we have to do to take photos, to style, to cook, to get where I am today with a full-time business and really living every day doing what I love. So I'm really lucky that I've been able to connect with thousands of photographers through my blog and Instagram and chat to hundreds of people through email about all sorts of things food photography. I love my community so much, and then you have supported me endlessly that I feel really like I have a responsibility to talk about my true journey. It actually pains me that somebody might quit because they feel like it was hard, it's not happening the way you think it is, or that you would compare your journey to mine on the outside of what it looks like on social media. This journey can be a lonely one, and I want you to know that you're not alone. So sharing some of these setbacks today, I really hope that you can see that we all have them and that failures and setbacks really leads to success. But just a disclaimer, I understand that there are people who have things much harder than I have. But the goal of this is to share really that our journeys are unique and some people will find it harder than me. Some people will have it easier than me. And I hope by sharing a real journey that you'll see that hard things are worth doing. The first time I left my full-time job to start photography, 2 weeks later, my husband lost his working visa. So him and I were both out of work and it was the most terrible time to start a business. It had taken me so much courage to leave that job, and here I was without a job, having to support the two of us. So first up, my journey was like really cut short to giving this thing a try. I had to work a retail job 6 days a week for 6 months to make ends meet until we could get the visa stuff sorted out and I could try again. At the time, it sucked, but I knew that was something totally out of my control and I could try again later, even though it had taken me so much courage to work up to that moment. The next time I was left my job, it was actually easier. So once we sorted the visa stuff out, I was working part-time as a photographer and working part-time in retail. That was going okay, but I started to get into my head. I started to listen to social pressure and pressure from family that I was getting older and I should have a career, I should have a salary, I should have a management position. And unfortunately, I let that get the better of me and I put photography to the wayside and I took a management position. And it turned out to be the wrong job for me and it was very stressful. So I didn't last there very long and it thrust me into full-time food photography before I was ready. Now, I have a certain way of how I feel about that, but my husband thinks it was the best thing that ever happened to me because he thinks that I wouldn't have made the leap into that food photography world that quick and full-time if I hadn't have taken that job and it not worked out. So here I am back at square one again, working on my business as a full-time photographer. And a couple of months later, my mother-in-law passed away from cancer. And we had to fly back and forth between Canada for 6 months. We wouldn't have it every other way because we wanted to be with family, but it's not a good time to work on a business. And it was very stop-start. We also had a loss of a family member that we loved. So it was a really hard mental battle to get through the loss of a loved one, trying to be creative and trying to work on a business. And it just felt like, yet again, here I am 3 years later, and I still can't make it work. A silver lining to all these things had taught me that even though there was so much in life that I couldn't control, the one thing I could control was the ability to try again. When we got back to Australia, I had the opportunity to work on my business full time, and that's what I did. And I hustled my butt off, taking every job possible, networking, learning skills, asking for feedback, connecting with other people. And what ended up happening is I got to a space of burnout. So I'd worked so hard for next to no money, that I had gotten myself into this space where I had no energy and I was fatigued. My mental health wasn't great, that unfortunately I had to take time off. I had to take 3 months off my business. And so here I was thinking, I've just spent 3 years trying to make this work full time and I've had all these setbacks. And I finally got to this place of being able to work on my business full time and I couldn't cut it. And I wasn't sure how I was going to move forward with that. I did move forward, and I know we've talked about a lot of hard things. So one of the things that got me through was changing my expectations and not being attached to results. That's when things really shifted for me. There were so many in-between moments within all of those setbacks. Of course, I experienced joy, successes, wins, even things that surprised me, but I also made a lot of mistakes too. There was self-sabotage because I didn't believe in myself. I didn't think I was worthy. Who was I to shoot a cookbook? Or who was I to take money from a client? I was actually really afraid of taking photos in public. I mean, it sounds really silly now, but that cost me a lot of jobs. Like getting up in a restaurant and taking photos terrified me. I hated people looking at me. So there was things that I really had to move forward with or like work out what was bothering me so that I could go ahead and take those jobs. So my first couple of client experiences were actually really challenging. My first ever paid gig was an event client and I had to shoot people and food. And the client wasn't happy with the photos I sent them. But I learned a lot from that experience. I also had another client that came up shortly after. It was my first food photography gig. And they wanted a lot of things. So I actually charged a lot of money, which I was astounded that I was paid that much. And this client turned out to be a little bit of a challenge for me. And I remember the art director or the creative director took me out for a coffee and she sat me down and said, "You can't charge this much." She actually said those words, but the whole conversation was like, "Who are you to charge this much? We won't work with you if you charge this much." And I was so new. This was not a conversation to me. This was like a takedown. And that really rattled my confidence in the beginning. And it took me years to charge that much again. There was other fun things along the way, like my first ever magazine job. I sent it to them and they were like, "We don't like this. Can you just get rid of that in Photoshop?" And I was like, "No, I don't know how to do that." So my husband and I literally stayed up all night trying to figure out how to do this. And it was a complete mess. So there is just so many moments on this journey that we don't necessarily have the skills to do them, but we make it up as we go along. I think I only have one regret over the last 10 years, and that was turning down a job at my dream magazine because I didn't know how to use artificial light. So I didn't work with that client. And to date, recording this video, unfortunately, I've never worked with them. I also talked myself out of a $40,000 international commission because I was like, "You can't do this. You're not good enough. Who do you think you are? You are so out of your depth." So I actually remember emailing the client and talking them out of hiring me. So that instead of me saying no, I talked them out of hiring me because I didn't believe I could do it. A lot of the community will know me for the educational side of my business. What you may not know is that I'm a teacher and I went to university to study education. I really wanted to make the educational part of my business work. Now, my first digital product and coaching didn't go so well. I think I enrolled or sold 5 ebooks. That was really disheartening for me because it was proof that, again, I couldn't do what I wanted to do. And it led me to a place where my mental health was really challenged. And I remember being on the street in Melbourne thinking, like, my thoughts were just like, "You can't do this. You're not good enough." And I actually ended up having a panic attack. And I realized this wasn't a way to live. My expectations are way up here to what I was able to achieve. And I was putting so much pressure on myself. So my mental health wasn't good. I was working too hard. I was taking all the jobs. I wasn't feeling like I was in control. And I had to step back again. And I went and sewed pants for 2 days a week to make ends meet, but also to give myself a break. It was a really good job, actually. I had some great people that I worked with, and it ended up being really therapeutic and like exactly what I needed at that time. But I also felt like a complete failure because I had to tell people, again, people would ask me how photography was going, and I was like, it's not going so well. I'm working 2 days a week sewing pants. So I felt like a real failure that I had to tell people over and over again that things weren't working. But what stood out for me the most in that situation is that I really wanted to make this work, and I was really committed to giving it a go. At that point, I really didn't care if things worked out or not. I just knew I had to give it my best try. And I actually wasn't in the best frame of mind. And things started to happen to me when I changed my expectations, when I changed how I thought about myself and the pressure I put on myself. And then I started to do things like say no to clients. I turned down jobs. I started to work on the things that I wanted to work on. And people started to take notice. So I did a course on Lightroom. And then a year later, not even a year later, it was a year later, I was speaking at a conference on Lightroom. I wrote blog posts about Nikon gear, and then they reached out to me. And I started working with Nikon teaching workshops. I didn't necessarily mean for any of this to happen, but I kept showing up over 5 years, kept working on things, and when I started to lower my expectations and be kinder on myself, things actually started to happen. So just as things started to work out for me and I started to make a name for myself, my husband got a job in Vancouver, Canada, and we were about to move. And I had mixed feelings about that because I thought I'd worked so hard to get to this point and make a name for myself, and I was going to have to start all over again. But this time I wasn't so scared of it because it felt more like a metamorphosis, that I could choose to leave the parts of my business that weren't working and move forward with the things that I really wanted to do. I had done this once and I knew I could do it again. And I started to really trust myself. And I think that's when my business really started to take off. These last 10 years of business have really taught me that there is no success without setbacks or failures. And there is so much that we cannot control within creativity and within life. The only thing that we can control is getting up every day and trying. If you feel like things are hard, you're probably on the right path. And in a day, we feel like we never get enough done. But if you keep showing up and trying, it is amazing what you can do within 10 years. That seems like a long time, doesn't it? Building a creative business is the hardest thing that I've ever done. But you're not alone. And I hope you keep trying. So thank you so much for being here and letting me share my journey with you. It's taken me 10 years to be comfortable enough to share some of the setbacks and failures that I've experienced. But my hope in doing so is that you won't give up, because maybe you thought my journey was easier or different. It's all about the long-term game. So do anything you can to survive, to be less stressed, to be kind to yourself, to trust and believe in yourself. Because I believe in you. If you're feeling brave, leave a comment and share a setback or a failure that you've experienced. I want the community to know that they're not alone and that we're all in this together. From the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you soon. A lot of the community knows me as no, I got it. I'm gonna do a new thing. Okay, we good?